Glenn Blumhorst has been one of our strong leaders in the Peace Corps community. In many ways, he is looked on as the one person that has to herd all these returned Peace Corps volunteers. That is a very challenging job because there are a few independent thinking people in that cohort. But the bottom line is Glenn has done a magnificent work in leading the National Peace Corps Association, which is the alumni group of the Peace Corps. He's also, prior to his work with the National Peace Corps Association, he was very active as a leader with non-government officers and organizations. But most importantly, he was a Peace Corps volunteer from 69 to 92 in Guatemala. He was also worked with AID as the country representative and chief of the party on several major US AID funded projects through Central and South America. He has he has a master's in public administration and a bachelor of science in agriculture, both from the University of Missouri in Columbia. He is a recipient of the prestigious University of Missouri Faculty Alumni Award. And being from Missouri, I think he's a Cardinal fan also, hopefully. But Glenn is very active in his work, not only with Peace Corps, but he's a Rotarian at the Capitol Hill Club. And when he does have a few minutes, he enjoys flying. He's a private pilot with over 400 hours of flight time.
Thank you so very much, Dick. It's just an honor to be here speaking with you all at Capitol Hill of Washington, Rotary Club of Washington, D.C. And my mom would be proud. I'm just a farm boy from Missouri who here we are in Washington, D.C. speaking at the Rotary Club. I'm very grateful, Dick, for your invitation that you extended to me to speak, and really thankful also for all the work that you have done for the Peace Corps community, both in your service as a volunteer and in the agency, but also with National Peace Corps Association. And most recently, you have put together a task force and worked over the last year or more on a really important survey of our Peace Corps community. And we're going to launch that this week. And I'm very grateful because that is going to be such a tremendous resource for us as we capture some very important data from our Peace Corps community, that survey going out this week. But as you can see this morning, I'm over here at the White House, reminiscing with some dear friends of the early founders of the Peace Corps when John F. Kennedy signed the legislation for the creation of the Peace Corps through the Peace Corps Act. Peace Corps was established by executive order earlier on March 1st of 1961. And there were already volunteers in the field by the time they got around to getting the legislation passed. But imagine how fast they were working back then to get the Peace Corps approved by Congress and all the work that went into that. This morning, we were able to honor two of our pioneers of the Peace Corps, Bill Josephson, who co-authored the work called A Towering Task with Warren Wiggins. Essentially, those two were the early architects of the Peace Corps, as well as Bill Moyers, who really walked the hallways of Congress, helping to make sure that Peace Corps was given a priority and passed by Congress. So it's really a special moment for us to celebrate today, the 60th anniversary of the Peace Corps. Throughout this week, we have a variety of other activities going on as we're celebrating the Peace Corps' 60th anniversary. And it's just a really special moment for all of us in our Peace Corps community. I fast forward a little bit from where we are there in the White House. This is me 30 years later in my Peace Corps community. Well, 30 years later and 40 pounds later, here I am. And this is just such a special moment for me, visiting with the counterpart that I work with, a young woman named Felisa and her village. She's standing there in the doorway of the mud hut where she lived, and some of the farmers that I was working with at the time. I was reflecting on that this morning, that it's essentially been, I served around the 30th year of the Peace Corps, and now we're celebrating the 60th anniversary of the Peace Corps. So I guess that in a way makes me middle-aged in Peace Corps years, right? At least I'll consider it that way. But After Peace Corps, and I served with my wife, Kathy, there, and she was a nurse, now is a nurse practitioner and works on a variety of different things here in Washington, D.C., or currently at the National Institutes of Health. I embarked on a journey of international development, particularly working in community development, and over the years, working primarily in Latin America. I lived 10 years in Bolivia, in addition to the total of 7 years that I lived in Guatemala. I also lived for 2 years in Colombia. So I spent nearly 20 years of my life and career in Latin America. But as I continued to kind of broaden my work scope, eventually I was responsible for programs around the world with the organization that I was working with, ACDI VOCA. And my work took me to Afghanistan, and where we were working on some community development work there. And it was just a fascinating experience. I spent probably a total of about 6 months off and on visits and short-term work in Afghanistan, up in Mazar-e Sharif. And I remember, it's inevitable there that you'll mingle with folks from everywhere, from the embassies and from the military and from development organizations. And running into a military fellow who said, look, down in Kandahar, he said, there's a place that they call Little America, because of the fact that Peace Corps volunteers were there so many years ago, and the people there have such fond memories of the Peace Corps volunteers and the work that they did there. And he said that is really truly the people-to-people value of the Peace Corps, and the difference that it can make in the lives of the hearts and minds of individuals here in Afghanistan. And that causes me some pause, of course, as we have spent the last 2 decades trying to essentially prove to the world that we could rebuild societies from the top down, as we tried in Afghanistan. Our military leading the way, and American taxpayer very generously spending more than $2 trillion and thousands of lives on a task that really, in retrospect, probably was never achievable, despite all the sacrifices that were made. And it would be true that we could be forgiven for believing that our engagement overseas is pointless, and we could even think that we should stop engaging the world because of what we've just experienced in Afghanistan, and that we should retreat and that we should self-isolate and give up. But really, that truly would be such a mistake. It not only would undermine America's security and our prosperity, it's just not true. We need to engage. We need to build bridges of friendship and understanding around the world. We as Peace Corps volunteers, those of us on this call who have served in the Peace Corps, we've seen the other side of official American engagement with the rest of the world. We know what it means to be welcomed by our counterparts in our communities and our villages, and to build partnerships with them on behalf of the United States. We really know it's possible because we've been doing this for 6 days. It's been done, and we've done well. We've just not been enough Peace Corps volunteers serving around the world. And because of the COVID pandemic, there's not any volunteers serving in the field, as you know. They were evacuated last March, all 7,000 of them. But more than 240,000 Americans have served in the Peace Corps since 1961. And last year was 7,000, as I said, serving in around 61 or 62 countries up until the evacuation last year. But now there are none. And with Afghanistan in the rearview mirror, it's really more urgent for us than ever to send American volunteers back out to the field and back out to their posts in the countries where they were serving and the communities where they were living. It's more important than ever before. There's not only a humanitarian interest in returning Peace Corps volunteers to the field, but there's really a strategic imperative as well in doing so. We just can't afford, Americans can't afford to stay at home. Our global competitors like China, they're salivating at the thought of an American retreat. Nothing would be better than to rebut that image than US volunteers, civilian volunteers being sent abroad to build peace, just as they were by President Kennedy in 1961 at the height of the Cold War. So fortunately, though the Peace Corps hasn't been in the field, our Peace Corps community has been preparing for this moment today and this week, organizing to not only return volunteers to the field, but to do so differently. There have been a lot of changes in the agency's work for years, and this past year and a half created an opportunity for the Peace Corps community itself to assess what and wasn't working, and for Americans and our partners overseas. And we produced, as a result of a series of town halls and a big summit that we had last year, a set of recommendations by the grassroots of our community to make Peace Corps better. And we're looking forward to that becoming the case as Peace Corps reemerges. We saw, for example, that the Peace Corps community, or when I say Peace Corps community, I say return volunteers, former staff, host country nationals, family, friends, anyone who has an affinity for the Peace Corps. Our Peace Corps community said that we want to see the agency work to rectify systemic racism and to strengthen the recruitment and support of volunteers from communities of colors, and to root out any gender-based discrimination in the Peace Corps as an institution. It wants that agency to seek innovative solutions to shared global problems like COVID, and one that's shifting to expectations in the developing world. Our community wants the agency to both listen and learn from our global partners so that volunteers can provide them with the best that America has to offer. And as Sam Farr would often say, Peace Corps volunteers represent the best of America, and that's why we send ourselves abroad. Alongside these reforms, our community wants the agency to also create programs that train American talent to succeed in the global marketplace. We are a global economy in a global world. The world is so much smaller than it was in 1961. We want to mobilize the vast network of returned Peace Corps volunteers to effectively implement the agency's third goal, strengthening Americans' understanding about the world and its peoples. There's really, truly a domestic dividend for Peace Corps volunteers that has really been yet to be cashed. We are the third goal of the Peace Corps at National Peace Corps Association. So listening to our collective wisdom from Americans who served in the field abroad will be the antidote to the failed top-down military first priority of policies of the past 2 decades. Congress and the Biden administration have been very receptive to these views. Legislation right now is moving in both chambers of Congress to reauthorize and renew the Peace Corps, providing it with the vision, reforms, and funding that it needs to become the best arm of American and global engagement that it can be. The legislation is called the Peace Corps Reauthorization Act of 2021. It calls for $600 million in funding for the agency by 2025. That's up from the current level of funding of $410 million per year. That's where it's been for the last 6 years. And if you account for inflation, it really should be upwards of $450 to $500 million by now. As Americans, frankly speaking, we're embarrassed by the paltry funding for the Peace Corps, especially consider this, that we spent roughly $300 million per day over the last two decades of a war in Afghanistan. And certainly America can afford to increase what we invest in the Peace Corps and improving it just by increasing it by what we would spend in one full year by 1 1/3 days of spending in Afghanistan. So for 6 decades now, Peace Corps has been welcomed across the globe while advancing America's self-interest. For far too long, though, our country's taken this tool of American power for granted. But those of us who believe in America's capacity to do good while advancing both our interests and values, taking the Peace Corps for granted is a luxury we can no longer afford. So we, the American people, coming in peace, we're what the rest of the world wants from us. We don't want more Afghanistan scenarios. I'd really like to ask you to join NPCA, be a part of ensuring the future of the Peace Corps, work with us to advocate to Congress for the important budget and the reforms that we believe are important in the Peace Corps. Really, if you can imagine, prior to the pandemic, 17 to 18,000 individuals, I believe was the number, that were applying to serve in the Peace Corps per year. And if there were 7,000 volunteers serving, that means there are roughly 3,500, 3,600 slots that are available. So for 3,500 slots, there are over 15,000 applicants. Many very well qualified applicants were being turned away from serving their country in the Peace Corps. I'm just so very grateful that I had the opportunity to serve my country in the Peace Corps. Coming from a military family where my dad was a Marine, my brother was serving in the Army while I was serving in the Peace Corps, an uncle that I lost in Vietnam, I really truly believe in the values of the Peace Corps. And I believe that it's a tremendous, wise investment, the best bang for the buck, as somebody said. And as we've heard many times from Congressman Sam Farr and others, it really is worthwhile. I hope you'll join me here at National Peace Corps Association in advocating for the Peace Corps when the time comes. Anybody, as I said, can be a member of National Peace Corps Association. We are returned volunteers, we're former staff, we are future volunteers, we're future staff. We are host country nationals, diaspora, family of Peace Corps volunteers, friends of Peace Corps volunteers, anyone who has an affinity for the Peace Corps. And by virtue of the week that we're celebrating, I would say you all have an affinity for the Peace Corps. So it's free to join National Peace Corps Association. We are part of the continuum of the Peace Corps life, if you will. that starts with 2 years or 3 years, as in my case, of service abroad. And we champion lifelong commitment to the ideals of the Peace Corps as we continue to serve after our service. NPCA has transitioned from what was originally kind of an alumni association, much like that of a university, to a community-driven social impact organization. And it's really all about helping our community do best what they do, which is make a difference around the world. We're a bunch of do-gooders. We're 250,000, if you will, do-gooders. And really, National Peace Corps Association is about harnessing that for the effort of all of us collectively as a tremendous force for good. So help me, if you will, to convince Congress that Peace Corps needs to be funded, that Peace Corps volunteers need to return to the field as soon as conditions permit, and we need to scale up the Peace Corps over the next several years. The funding recommendations are there in the legislation that I mentioned. The demand from countries are there for more volunteers. The supply of qualified candidates is there. We just need more funding for the Peace Corps. Rotarians can advocate for the Peace Corps. If you care about the Peace Corps, just sign up. I'll put a link here in the chat bar here in a little bit about where you can sign up for NPCA and be a part of our community. And if there are any Rotarians who want to become Peace Corps volunteers, I know there's a place you can find a recruiter and sign up to go. There's no upper age limit. If you haven't served yet, you have the opportunity to do so at any time. And if you have served, those of you out there who are returned Peace Corps volunteers or former staff, thank you so much for your service. Thank you, Dick, for your leadership, both in the Peace Corps community and in the Rotary community. I'm really grateful and honored to have been a part of this event today. And we'll be happy to answer any questions if time permits. But thank you so much for allowing me to share a few words today.
Yes, Glenn, thank you for being with us. And you talked about 250,000 do-gooders, the Peace Corps alumni. There's 1.4 million do-gooders in Rotary. So we make a great team together, and glad that you're a Rotarian. My question is, what would be 3 of the best practices that the Peace Corps volunteers learn when they're abroad, that when they bring back, they put up these to good use in their family, their community, and their professional lives? What would separate them from many other people in society? And thank you for being here.
Thank you very much, Doctor. I would say that if Dick's survey was done yet, we would have all the answers to that with data to back it up. So stay tuned. We can give you a much more data-driven answer to that. But I think most commonly the things that we hear, let me say first, almost every returned Peace Corps volunteer and former staff that I have visited with, and I've had the privilege of meeting so many of them, will undoubtedly say first and foremost that it was the most life-transforming experience that they've ever had, right? And we have a lot of experiences in our lifetime, but I've heard that from returned volunteers of all generations. The other thing that we'll say is that we got more out of it than we gave. Even though maybe we went into the Peace Corps as idealists and we're going to change the world and make it a better place, we realized through our experience that we actually gained so much more out of it than we were ever able to give. Some of the things that I think that we gained, if you want to call them best practices, one word kind of sums it up: grit. Really, it's really about, we're ready for any challenge. We're ready for any type of opportunity as well. We had a special session this morning, and we had some technical difficulties with Zoom, but we just bounced around and overcame it and just went on with the program. And that's kind of what we do. If we step outside and want to go up and get our lunch and it's raining and we don't have an umbrella, we're willing to stand there and wait a half an hour until the rain clears. So there's a lot of different things that I think that we learn, but it's probably more than anything, I think, the adaptability and the resiliency, coupled with the fact that we have a much deeper appreciation of other countries and cultures. And I would say, coming from mid-Missouri as I did, from a small town where really nobody had ever left the country. My parents had never traveled outside the country. It really expanded my worldview. My parents came to visit as well. It dramatically influenced their lives. Peace Corps can really change people's perceptions and understanding of the world. And I think that really is what will contribute to world peace when it's all said and done.
Glenn, thank you. A very astute answer to the question.
Glenn, thanks for being here. I've been an NPCA member since about 1990 when I came home from Morocco. Um, I guess I want to ask about why you're emphasizing kind of the role of the Peace Corps in soft diplomacy. When I was out in the desert in Untitled, Morocco, an Arab country right before the first Gulf War, one of the biggest challenges I had to overcome was persuading people that no, I was not a member of the CIA. And in fact, the CIA had no interest in Untitled, Morocco. So I always found the soft diplomacy approach to be a real obstacle to connecting with people in country, as opposed to simply the idea that we were out there to help people, which I think is what drove most of the people in my stage. So I'm wondering why you're emphasizing that so much. And, I guess I'm also expressing kind of a respectful dissent.
Yeah, thank you very much for today, and good to see you. Thanks for being an MPCA member. Let me just emphasize this. The greatest value, I think, in the Peace Corps service is the people-to-people relationships that are built. I have friends from Guatemala that I'm in touch with on a daily basis. I post something on Facebook, and most of the responses I get are in Spanish from friends that I have back in Guatemala from my Peace Corps days. And I really, truly believe that if we're going to bridge divides that we have even here in the United States, as well as build friendship and peace abroad with others, that deeper understanding of other cultures and countries on the part of Americans, and then of those other countries and cultures of Americans as well, is really the most important part of the Peace Corps. If I had my druthers, maybe I'd flip the goals of the Peace Corps upside down and make the second and third goal about that intercultural exchange, that the most important part of the work that we do, and the first goal of helping other countries, with their development work or technical assistance that we can provide, the lesser goal, if you will. We're really reemerging as a new Peace Corps. I think that won't consider ourselves so much as helping others, but partnering with others and serving others. And so I think, back to the words that of the Sergeant Shriver that somebody shared earlier: serve, serve, serve. That's why I joined the Peace Corps, was to serve. I think that's why so many others join, is to serve. And I think service really is the solution to many of the issues that we have, both here at home and abroad. We need more members of Congress to have served in the Peace Corps or in the national service in some way. We need more Americans to have national service opportunities as well, whether AmeriCorps or Peace Corps or in the armed forces. We have so little of our members of Congress these days that have served in any capacity or traveled abroad or have a passport. So to answer your question, I would just say I think it's really the people value, not so much the diplomacy or the business opportunities that we can develop. It's about friendships.
As the moderator today, I'd love to jump in and follow up on that question. And actually, I think it opens some other questions for me. And you mentioned what some of the other countries do. Would love to hear from you what you're finding and what we're either learning from other people's mistakes, or what we're learning to replicate from what other countries are doing in this sort of soft power maneuvering.
Yeah, I really don't know that I'm the best person to answer that question. There's Director Olson and others here on the call who probably can speak much better to that. But what I would say is I think we are learning, and we've learned from our experience in particular of late, that we need to go as partners, not as saviors, if you will, and that the work that we do, must be on an equal basis. Certainly a reciprocity of sorts that we have in our experience. Certainly, we believe that the Peace Corps and the Peace Corps volunteers are ambassadors, the grassroots ambassadors. They represent the face of America, and that's why we feel that we need to see that there's a representation of the face of America in the Peace Corps in terms of the inclusion of people of color and others, and that it goes the same thing in our own community as well. We believe that serves our country well in showing the rest of the world who we are and what we're comprised of, and the diversity of opinions and political inclinations and religious affiliations and colors that our country is so important, I think, to demonstrate to the rest of the world. I do truly believe that the work that we do, though, lays the foundation for our diplomacy and development work over the longer term. I believe that, friendships, like I mentioned in Afghanistan, where in the middle of a military conflict, there were Afghans who truly really valued the people of America and the country that we are, from the experience of Peace Corps volunteers there many years ago, and how long lasting that was. And the former ambassador to Afghanistan tells a story sometimes where this is Ambassador Carl Eikenberry, who was appointed ambassador under the Obama administration, had gone to a village, and he ran across an elder in the village who thanked Peace Corps Peace, as he said, Peace Corps Jim, as he said, or whatever the name was. And this elder had come out to thank him for the service of a Peace Corps volunteer, 40 years earlier. And Carl Eikenberry remarked that what impressed him so much about that is, 2 weeks earlier, they had suffered some casualties there in that area, and 12 Marines or so were killed. And he said, the village leaders here won't ever know the names of those Marines who gave their lives here, but they still remember the Peace Corps volunteer that was here 40 years later. And I really think that's really the foundation that we can build around the world.
Thanks. And Jody, I saw you raise your hand.
Yeah, I'll be quick. One, I think the humility that others teach us as Peace Corps volunteers, and practicality and how to get things done at local levels, we learn humility, and others teach us humility. Second, on a practical level, when I met with the head of HRSA, the Health Resources and Services Administration, he said, I want to hire as many return volunteers as I can, because what the volunteers learn in health is what community health is, and community action and community collaboration around one health professional in all these other villages. And he said, we don't teach that very well in the United States. We need what volunteers have learned from other countries about community health to be able to apply here in the US. Just one example.
I thank you so much for being here. This is a celebration of the Rotary Peace Corps Partnership. We honor our speakers with the planting of a tree on the National Mall or by the tidal basin. We plant 45 trees, one for each speaker every year, and we will plant one in your honor today, Glenn. So you'll get an invitation from us for the next tree planting ceremony, which will probably be in early November. And in the meantime, you get a tree certificate signed by yours truly, committing to planting that tree. And we'll even be able to provide you the GPS coordinates of it. So with that, I will adjourn the meeting.